All right, so everyone holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 18. Again, want to welcome everyone holding by the Book of Leviticus 18. It's good to be back. We are in verse 2. And we're speaking the last number of weeks, actually, before holiday interruption, speaking about the connection between the mind and the heart, and about working on our desires. Torah says, by the Hashem Moshe Lemor, God spoke to Jewish people saying, verse 2, the Bear El Bnei Israel ve'amart aleim ani Hashem Elokeichem. So the Torah says that I am speaking to the children of Israel and saying to them, I am the eternal your God. Right, which we mentioned, Rashi says, I am the Lord your God, whose kingship you accepted, therefore accept my decrees. And it said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, that it was known to God in the days of Ezra that ultimately they would revolt against restricting sexual relations, which is what this entire chapter is all about, which we're going to get to. And he made a decree and said, I am the Lord your God, meaning I make this decree upon you, and you got to keep it, right? Essentially, you got to keep it, right? It's what Rashi says. So it comes along. We've been in the middle of this Orach Chaim B'Kadosh. Orach Chaim B'Kadosh, one of the great commentaries more than 100 years ago. So he says like this. He says this command, this mitzvah, what does it correspond to? Corresponds to the evil inclination. Corresponds to the Yetzer Hara. It will say what? How is the person, in general, according to nature, how are they able to have power, control, let's say better, control over their desires? Because essentially, we could say a person's under onus, person's beyond their control, right? What can they do? Right? What can they do? It's beyond their control, right? It's not something, right? It's not something easily controllable. So we'll say, well, since it's not so easy to control, right? Then we'll say, listen, the evil inclination comes, right? Their evil inclination comes, and what can you do? Right? It's beyond your control. Now, we can ask the question, is that really true? I mean, the Gemara says that God created the evil inclination, and there's an antidote. The antidote is Torah. Now, the Gemara also says, even though the antidote is Torah, you need heavenly help to overcome it, right? It's not possible in general for a person to be able to overcome it by themselves. So what would be the obvious question here? The obvious question is, if a person has an evil inclination, they have a Yetzer Hara, right? They have an evil inclination, what happens? You're in its control. You're trapped in its web. So if you're trapped in its web, you give into it. Doesn't mean you don't fight it, doesn't mean you don't work hard against it. Yeah, but if it's that powerful in general, and we're going to say it traps you, it forces you to do things you wouldn't want to do, or that you shouldn't do, let's say better, that go against what God wants, okay. So then what's the question? The question is, why am I liable? That's the question. Should be liable. Because essentially it's out of my control, right? That's what onus means. It's out of my control. It's not something that I'm able to control. So a person gets upstairs after they die, after 120 years, God's going to say, did you learn Torah? God's going to ask you, we honest to business, question which question comes first, right? Doesn't really matter, but, a person will say, listen, you create the evil inclination. Now I know what absolute truth is, but it's too late. You created the evil inclination. I'm stuck. It's an impossibility for me to overcome. So now there are two ways of looking at it. If you're going to tell me a person's born that way, right? The Mission Pirkei Avos, right, says in Ethics of Our Fathers, you're born against your will, you die against your will. Very good. So Goffman would say in parentheses, you have to live, right? You still have to live. Okay. But there are many things you're not in control of. You're not in control of your socioeconomic situation. You're not in control of who your parents are, who your siblings are. Okay. So if you're given certain DNA, which we are from our parents for better or for worse, we're given certain DNA. Okay. So if we're given certain DNA, right? If we're given certain DNA, what would I say? Right? I would say it's not my fault. You, God, programmed me this way. Okay? Yeah? You programmed me. So if you program me, I'm under onus. I'm fighting with two hands tied behind my back, so to speak. So what do you expect? You can't expect something that is part of me, that essentially is part of me. You can't expect me to fight back. I don't have the vessels. I don't have the wherewithal, let's say better. I don't have the wherewithal to fight it. You didn't create it in such a way. Right? You didn't create me to be able to do that. Right? Well, what's God going to answer? What's God going to answer? So I put on my funny George Burns glasses, my funny mustache. What would I answer if I were God? I'd say, you're right. I gave you an evil inclination. But there's an antidote. There's a way to fight the evil inclination. The way to fight the evil inclination is Torah. So the Gemara says, if you're overcome by the evil inclination, what do? Say the Shema. That's the first thing you should do. Take on the yoke of heaven. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Right? God, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. God is one. You take on the yoke of heaven, acknowledging there's one God in the world. Very good. Then you say, Hashem Elokeinu. You say, you are the, there's an obligation to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your money, whatever it means, etc. So then you're taking on the yoke of mitzvahs. So that'll stop you. So the Gemara says, what if that doesn't work? What if you're still overcome by evil inclination? Then go to the base medrash. Then you got to go to the study. Right? You go learn. Go to the synagogue. Go learn. Right? Sit down and learn. And what if that doesn't work? What's the last resort? The Gemara says, think of the day of your death. Because if you think of the day of your death, then what's going to happen? You're going to think that you're going to have to give. You're going to have to answer. You're going to have to answer for what you've done in this world. If you got to answer for what you've done in this world, that'll stop you. Right? So there's a question on that, on this Gemara. Why not think of the day of your death first? Right? If you know you're going to have to answer to the King of Kings, right, in a few minutes, in a few seconds, yeah, wouldn't that drive someone to want to repent, to want to not give in to their evil inclination? Okay, so we're not going to be that morbid. There are some people out there, that think about this, and will think about the day they die. There's a famous story with Rav Chaim Brisker. That Rav Chaim Brisker said on his father. Chaim Brisker, more than 200 years ago, was the Rav in Brisk. His father was a Beis Halevi, right? Famous Beis Halevi, wrote a commentary on the Chumash. He wrote responsive Shivas and Chuvas, right? Questions and answers, whatever. One of the Torah giants of the generation. And every day, I don't know from what age he started this, but every day he would put his hands over fire, right? To feel what the burning sensation would be like, what hell is going to be like, right? What that burning fire is going to be like, right? Hard to understand how a soul gets burnt, but soul can feel it, right? However God does it, doesn't really matter. The soul will feel it. The soul will feel the pain. He wanted to feel what the pain is going to be like. Yeah. By the end of his life, his hands were black. His hands were essentially black. They did this on a regular basis. So his son, Rav Chaim, told his son, the Brisker Rav, was also the Rav of Brisk, after his father. Rav was at Soloveitchik, blessed memory, one of Torah giants, the last generation, lived for many years in Israel. And the Brisker Rav said on his father when he was already 6 or 7. When he was already 6 or 7, he told him, you got to remember, yesh din v'yesh dayan, right? There's judgments, there's a judge. Action we're going to have to answer for. Told this to him as a 6-year-old, as a 7-year-old. You got to realize this world's not hefker. It's not ownerless. We don't live in an ownerless world, right? I got to take responsibility for what I do. The one side of the equation, you'll tell me, okay, a person's born that way. So God put it in your DNA. You say, I'm on their own. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. You can't punish me. Yeah. You made me this way. That's one side of the coin. But what could God answer? God could answer, you're right. I gave you certain DNA. I gave you certain things you got to fight against. You got to work hard on. Okay. Everybody has it. But he says, God will say, let's say better, God will say, I gave you an antidote. What's the antidote? Torah. Torah's the antidote. Now, granted, the Gemara says that God said, you still need my help to overcome the evil inclination. Okay, Torah by itself going to be very hard, but the more you're steeped in Torah, yeah, you're able to fight the evil inclination. That doesn't mean you'll always be successful. The evil inclination does a very good job, doesn't need me to agree, right? But the evil inclination does a great job. His goal is to make us sin, to make us want to sin, to make us want to do the wrong thing. So if a person's not steeped in Torah, you don't have a chance, right? The Rambam in the laws of the 13 principles of faith. So the Rambam says, as part of the 13 principles, the Rambam says that it's either, the God's absolute, right? God is absolute. So either you basically believe in God or you believe in idolatry, right? There's nothing in between. Either you believe in one or the other. If you're not subservient to God, you will be subservient to other things. That doesn't necessarily mean person's bowing down to idols. Idol worship, a relative term over here. It could be a person, you take God out of the world, so you're giving something more power than it is. Fame, money, food, right? People certainly, the way, food is thrown around today, right? No pun intended. The way it looks is to be enticing. So you're going to want to buy it. You're going to want to eat it. Doesn't matter if it's good for you, not good for you, right? That's what you do, right? So, we'll see in chapter 19, where we'll get there one day. I don't know when. But the Torah there says you should be holy because God says he's holy. Very good. What does it mean? So difference of opinion between Rashi and the Ramban and Nachmanides. Rashi says stay away from forbidden relationships. That's what it means. Comes on the Ramban and says, doesn't mean that. It means when you eat, you're allowed to eat. You're allowed to drink. Very good. Right? But who says you should be a god? Who says you should be 50 pounds overweight? And who says you should be an alcoholic? Doesn't matter if you're permitted to drink. You gotta drink within reason. Right? Doesn't say on all the bottles, drink responsibly, responsibly, whatever. You gotta take responsibility. So on one side of the coin, God is gonna say, you're right, it's part of your DNA. 100% is part of your DNA. But just because it's part of your DNA, I gave you something to fight it. I gave you something to work on. Torah. That's going to fight it. Okay. That's one side of the coin. What's the other side of the coin? The other side of the coin is I wasn't born that way. A person did, not me. Somebody something that now makes it harder to fight against. They give in themselves to the evil inclination. Not that they're born this way. Not that they're born with certain character traits. Everybody is. Right? We got good character traits, got bad character traits. Right? But the bad character traits we've got to work on. We give, a person can be born with, he's got more, anger to deal with than anyone else. Right? Than most people. Or they got other things they got to work on, whatever it is. What if you bring it upon yourself? See, if you bring it upon yourself, we're going to say the same thing. There's an antidote towards the antidote, but you can't make an excuse. Right? You're not going to be able to say, I was born that way. Because in this case, you weren't. This was not part of your DNA. But what did you do? As Ramchal says, you got caught up in what's around you. Right? You're in this world to toil. So what did you do? You gave in to some of these influences. What happens when you give in to any of these influences? They then become part of you. It becomes part of your psyche. Once it becomes part of your psyche, then again, we'll go back to the first case. Right? To the other side of the coin. Now it's part of your psyche. Now it's part of your DNA. Makes it almost impossible to fight against. Not saying impossible, almost. Makes it very hard. Because you bring it upon yourself. Now, I would say, in that sense, it's worse. Because even though the evil inclination comes, going to try and trap you, trying to make you do things you shouldn't want to do, that go against what God wants, goes against the Torah, very good. You're going to say, what can I do? I'm stuck. I was born that way. Great. Great excuse. So maybe you'll be exempt, even though God says, guess what? I made the Torah as an antidote. So you're not exempt. But it's worse. It's worse if you did it to yourself. Once a person does it to themselves, then you got no one to blame, right? The only person you have to blame is you, yourself. You don't have anyone else to blame, right? You can't pass the buck. You cannot pass the buck over here. You are guilty, and that's worse. Because you did it to yourself. So now you have to unravel it. Now you have to try and fix it. Right? Now it's part of you. Now it's part of your DNA. So that makes it harder. Makes it a lot harder. But again, as the Gemara says there, you got an antidote. Right? What's the antidote? The antidote is Torah. So if I use the antidote correctly, properly, right, what's going to happen? It should overcome. It should give me the ability to overcome. But the problem is that the evil inclination makes it very hard. The evil inclination, even if you beat it today, the evil inclination comes back tomorrow in a different way, in a harder way, right? So therefore, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a lot, tomorrow comes, the evil inclination doesn't do the same thing it did before. Uses some other mechanism to get to you. If that doesn't work, uses something else. The evil inclination has a lot of patience. All the evil inclination needs to do is find a person's weak spot. And even if it makes a tiny hole, as we mentioned many times, if it makes a tiny hole, the evil inclination says, I'm in. Right? I'm in. Even if the hole stays tiny for years. Right? For months. All the evil inclination needs is a hole. One, even a tiny hole. Because once it's got a tiny hole, it's only a matter of time before that hole gets bigger. And that hole gets bigger. Right? The evil inclination is not going to come in general, and try and get us to do idolatry. That he knows is never going to work. Right? It's never going to have any effect. That he knows. At the same time, what's he going to do? He's going to try and weaken your resolve. And the more he's able to weaken your resolve, the easier it is. The easier it is. So eventually he'll get you to do what he wants you to do. And obviously not what we want to do. So the evil inclination can say, okay, doesn't happen today. I'll work on it, tomorrow in a different way. I'll work on it this way, a third day, a fourth day, fifth day, 2 weeks, a month. The evil inclination keeps coming, never stops. So at that point, if we've done it to ourselves, whatever it may be, we've fed that evil inclination. So the more we feed it, the harder it is to fix. It's like any bad character trait. The more you give into it, the harder it is to fix. So the Rambam learns I should find a middle path. In other words, you're trying to beat something, whatever it is, whatever character trait you want to fix, go to one extreme, right? Go to a different extreme and then meet somewhere in the middle. Right? You find the middle path, something that you're able to do, you're able to keep, you're able to keep this thing at bay. Trying to hit it head on, straight away, going to be very hard. Ask anyone that smokes, right? Nicotine is addictive. And that is why, years ago, the tobacco companies got sued up the gazoo because they made it addictive, right? Tell anyone who smokes, give up tomorrow. They can't. It's physically impossible in general. Why? And there are some people who've been able to do it. Okay. Most people will not be able to do it. Why not? Very simple. The body craves it. Since the body craves it, you got to either, give it a substitute or figure out what to do when you have that craving to smoke, right? It's a very hard thing, right? There are people, obviously, who are able to give it up. Other people, it's much harder, much, much harder, and that's because it's addictive. So any addictive behavior, right? Any addictive behavior is very hard, right? Doesn't matter what it is, right? Could be by cigarettes, could be by drinking, could be, any addiction, could be sports, could be food, any of these things, right? And there's certain chemicals in foods, right? We'll see if they get rid of all the chemicals, in the States from foods, but, all the bad chemicals, let's say. But there are chemicals they put in food that make it addictive. A person eats a potato chip, right? Totally unhealthy, whatever, probably kill you, right? In the process. So, you don't just eat one. Right? Now, if someone's really disciplined, maybe, right? But, they're tasty. They make it extra tasty, right? For that reason. And the way it's packaged and the way, it's, what do you call it? It's marketed, other things, okay. But, there was this famous commercial years ago for Vlasic pickles, right? Back in the day. Can't just eat one. Part of the commercial. Can't just eat one. Well, why can't you just eat one? They'll say, well, it's so tasty. You eat one, you want to eat another one. Doesn't mean you're going to finish the whole thing. Finish the whole bottle or the whole jar, right? Or whatever it is. That doesn't necessarily mean that, right? But you'll say you eat one. It's so tasty. You eat another. No, they make it tasty. Very good. But what's in it that makes it tasty? They put things in it, obviously. Preservatives and other things, right? Obviously for a long, shelf life. Very good. Same time, it'll be hard just to eat one. Now, you tell me there are people out there, yeah, they just eat one. Okay. Yeah. But there are chemicals in things. They know what they're doing. They know how to market it. They know how to make it look, right? All these things. So that's the second half of the coin. The second half of the coin is that it makes it very, very hard, very, very hard, very, very hard to fight over here. Now, why is that the case? That is the case because you did it to yourself, right? We're talking about a case where you did it to yourself. Now, that's a harder thing, right? That is, I would think that's a much worse thing than if you were born that way, if you got certain tendencies. Because if you have certain tendencies, okay, right? So you have the claim and say, well, it's not my fault, right? It's not really my fault. Why isn't it my fault? because I was born that way. Okay. So you were born that way. Beautiful. But even if a person, right, even if a person, let's say, even if a person was born that way, okay, so that's harder. That's harder, that I would agree. But I would say it's worse if you did it to yourself. If you did it to yourself, got no one else to blame. That's harder. Right? Seemingly, that's harder. So in this case, person is trapped, right? Essentially, a person is trapped. Because they are trapped, you'll say it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Good. But there's a way to fight it. Right? There's an antidote. And the antidote is Torah. But I need God to help me also. Right? I need both. I need the antidote with God's help. So here, the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here says, it's the nature of a person that what's going to happen is desire is going to overcome him, and he's going to do things that really are beyond his control. So let's analyze one other thing. So I've heard people say, I've been put in a position I can't handle. Now, we certainly believe whatever test the person's given, and we're given all kinds of tests. Some can be easier, some can be harder, some can seem absolutely impossible. So you say, God's put me in a test I can't handle. So obviously we don't believe that. We certainly don't believe that, even though it's a very hard test. We may think we can't handle it, but we have tests that are specifically made for each person. Right? God puts the soul into the body, right? He breathed in the spirit of life, as the Torah says. Gave us the ability to make decisions, right? To make decisions, right? We can make good decisions, bad decisions. Animals don't make decisions. They're programmed, right? They're programmed DNA. We can make decisions. So we have the ability, right, to make decisions. Good. So God puts inside of us whatever we're supposed to do in this world. We're not going to remember, right? No one is going to remember in this world while they're alive what their purpose is, right? So the question always comes up is, well, how do I know what my purpose is? Right? If I'm as a reincarnated soul, which is most people, soul comes back in order to get fixed up for whatever reason. Right? As we mentioned many times, let's say you have a child, born to autism or some other terrible disease, whatever it is, it can't be punishment for the child, right? We mentioned this many times because the child's unpunishable. Person's only punishable by the age of 12 or 13 for a boy and a girl, or by the age of 20. So it can't be punishment for the child, it's punishment for the soul. So the rectification for the soul could be it's put in a messed up body and it can't function the way it should function, etc. Now, why is that the case? Why did the soul get punished like that? So I can't answer. But it cannot be punishment for the person. The person's not liable, right? You can say, what about the sin of the parents? Maybe the parents brought in such a child, right? It's their fault. So again, each person is their own soul, right? A person's given a soul. A person's giving a message, a purpose in this world. So therefore, if they bring in a child like that in the world, it's obvious there's a reason a child's born that way. Yeah. I would say it's, when you look at it this way, I would say it's kind of like a quarter of a constellation, right? Because it's difficult to deal with kids like this, right? There's no question, and there'll be a lot of questions, why this happened, and is it genetics, and we should have been tested, and this and that. But at the end of the day, if we believe, as the Torah says, God puts and breathes the spirit of life into a person, the spirit of life is what we call the soul. So God is taking the soul from underneath the Kisei HaKavod, underneath his heavenly throne, whatever that means, and he's putting it into each person. And he's putting it into the body, that God feels is going to be the best to reach its potential. Because as we said before, right, the Torah is totally interconnected. As we said before, a person is born against their will. They die against their will. Meaning they don't have a choice to be in this world. They don't have a choice. I mean, we don't know what goes on in heaven, but bottom line is God is, the soul doesn't want to come because basking in God's glory. Maybe it's going to suffer also, doesn't really matter. But the soul really doesn't want to be in this world. So God has to convince the soul to get in this world, to be put in this world. So the soul itself will get thrown into a body, and that body and that family structure, whoever it's born to, is the best way for that soul to reach its potential. Now, the obvious question is, $1 million question or $2 million question is, how do we know what our potential is? Very good. Very, very good. We don't know. Nobody knows. Right? No one's giving us a Gilui Shechina that God's coming to us and saying, this is what you should have done. This is what your purpose is. This is what you have to fix up. We don't know. Right? Essentially, we don't know. Now, the rule of thumb, as was explained to me, again, I'm not going to say this is totally authoritative, but I would say it is food for thought, and that is that God's not going to give us something that's going to be easy to fix. In other words, it's going to be something that's going to take effort. It's going to take a lot of effort. The person may go through the whole lifetime, they may never fix it. Okay. Right? But what is that? Right? So I'll give you a parable. It's kind of like what, as was explained to me, think of something in your life. You would rather slit your eyeballs with glass than do it. For some people, it may be showing gratitude for others that helped them. For other people, it may be admitting that they did something wrong and to say that they're sorry. For other people, it may be, I don't know, whatever it is. It's something that you feel is impossible to do. It's the hardest thing in your life to do. Now, is that a guarantee that's what it is? No, it's not a guarantee, right? But again, it's not going to be made something easy. We're in this world, as the Ramchal says, we're in this world to toil. We're in this world to struggle. So the struggle is not going to be easy in whatever it may be. It may be problems with family. It may be problems, with health. It may be problems with livelihood. It may be problems with our kids. It may be problems, who knows what, maybe all these things together. There'll be all these things together. Say, wow, be the poster child over here. I got everything, right? Make life miserable, right? Very hard to live. So you're going to say, what if a person wants to just throw in the towel? They say it's too hard. They say it's impossible. Now, there are many cases, many, many cases, people given very hard trials, extremely hard trials, but it made them and shaped them who they are. Right? Tailor-made for them. Maybe sometimes God's going to squeeze us like the bottom of the toothpaste in order to get, let's say, a dormant character trait that has to come out, that has to be brought to the world in a certain way to give other people strength. I don't know, for whatever reason. Yeah? So a person will say, but I pray every day. We say every day in the morning, well, God shouldn't bring us to trials and tribulations. Right? We shouldn't have them. Okay. So let me ask the $3 million question. Well, I'm just talking millions here, right? $3 million question is, okay, but if you don't have trials and tribulations, how do you grow? You don't grow spiritually without them. So you have to have them, right? So some people would say that, like, this is so impossible, like, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Tunnel's only dark. I don't see where this is going. How can this be beneficial? So you got to keep in mind when it comes to trials and tribulations. I'd always tell people, we say, how much worse can it get? Right? So we say, Al tiftach pen l'satan. You never open your mouth to Mr. S. How much worse can it get? Who knows how much worse it could get? Right? But that's not even the point. The point is that, if you think about what goes on in a person's life. Now, person's going to say, this is terrible. This is awful. This is like, there's no way, there's no way out. Everything's bad. Everything looks bad. Now, let's analyze. Let's analyze for a second. You can say, okay, this is hard in my life. Family, impossible to deal with, right? Very painful. Okay. Livelihood, very painful. Okay. Health, very painful. Whatever. Whatever it is. Now, what about, as we always say, what about the bigger picture? Are these things hard? Depending on what the person's going through? Yes. Right? We're not going to deny it. It's hard. Right? It's a hard test. Okay. You feel your back's against the wall. You got your last $1.50 in the bank. You're going to say, I got all these bills to pay. What's going to be? Right? And what's the answer always? God, you're the one in charge. You are the one in charge. Put me in this mess, or I put myself in this mess, whatever it is, you have to be the one to take me out. You have to see there's only God in the world. Okay. It's beyond that. Why do I say it's beyond that? Because what does the person have? Let's look in their lives. What do they have? You have a roof over your head. You say, but I don't own it. Doesn't matter. Right? Doesn't matter to be renting for the next 20 years, 50 years. Okay. Not such a great thing. Throwing money away, but okay. So a person doesn't own their own house. Okay. But they have a roof over their head. So they have food. So they starve. Yeah. We can always make it worse. A lot worse. But a person, when they're getting beaten down alive, as we always say, you don't see the good. Impossible to see the good. It's a famous story with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva married the daughter of Rachel, the daughter of Kalva Savur, right? One of the wealthiest people in that day. And since she wanted to marry this, this ignorant shepherd as he was at the time, what happened? Kalva Savur cut her off. So I'm not giving you any money, not helping you. So they were poor, extremely poor. And Elijah's prophet, Gemara says, comes to visit them. And Elijah's prophet, they didn't know it was Elijah's prophet, but he comes, as a beggar. And he tells them, do you have any straw for me? Now, their beds were made on straw. I can't imagine. How comfortable that would be. But whatever. At least they had straw for beds. So comes Elijah the prophet and says, do you have any straw? So Rabbi Akiva says, yeah, we have some straw. I gave him some straw. So Rabbi Akiva was dancing. He says, look, they're thinking people worse off than us. Right? Hard to imagine. We're so poor. We have very little. But we have more than this person. Right? This person didn't even have straw. Imagine. So there are people, that are in worse situations than us. You're going to say, come on, you're making this up. Not true. Vilna Gaon, more than 250 years ago, sent his students, mentioned this many times, sent his students before Shabbos, visit people in the hospital. Now, these people were dirt poor. They were dirt poor, suffered tremendously. But when they went to the hospital, it's a different ballgame. Why is it a different ballgame? They see people in pain. They see people in agony. They see people who can't take care of their own needs. They see people that need to be fed. Yeah, they came into Shabbos whistling Dixie. I don't know how to do that. They were whistling Dixie going into Shabbos. You think they had chicken Friday night? No. Probably had like a couple peels of potato or something in the soup. It didn't take away the fact they were dirt poor. Didn't take away that. But it's a different perspective. It's a very, very different perspective. Right? I remember a few months back, when my wife, fractured her arm. So I had to go to, the emergency room. And the regular emergency room was very close to where we had to go. But you see people there. I mean, I'm sure in the States and other places worse. People gunshot wounds, who knows what else. But here, people people are in agony. A lot of people moaning, groaning, in pain, and this and that. And thank God, we just have to walk through it and go somewhere else. But that that should make a person think and say, okay, well, at least I don't have that. Even though she was in pain, fractured her arm, things are much better now. But even so, that was mercy. That was definitely mercy. You look at these people and say, wow, can't get out of bed, can't move, they're in agony. Calling for doctors. I mean, it's horrific. Any emergency room, I'm not going to say, just in Israel, I'm saying anywhere. I mean, I'm sure in other places worse because of all the people that come in with all kinds of things. Yeah. Does that, make you thankful you're alive? Doesn't it make you think, oh, thank God I don't have that? Thank God this is better. But what's the problem? You'll say, yeah, that's true. Right? And everyone would agree. And everyone would nod their head and say, yeah, you're 100% right. But how many people think that way? How many people think that there are people in the hospital, worse than you or have a lot worse than you? We don't think in those terms. Why don't we think in those terms? Because we're thinking about what we're going through now. That people will say that's not comforting. Yeah, because they don't internalize the message. They're only feeling their own pain. Okay, I get it. Whatever the pain is, doesn't matter. Whatever the pain is. So they feel it. Okay. Now it's legitimate. They are struggling. They're having a very hard time. Okay. Would you rather have this? Would you rather be in physical pain? Let's say you're not in physical pain. Let's say it's just, family problems. Yeah, let's just say it's just family problems. Painful. Would you rather be like throwing up all day? Would you rather, won't get gross there. Would you rather be like stuck to your bed, you can't move? You walk out, you stick your head up, you get vertigo, right? Can't move. The whole room is spinning, right? The whole house is spinning. You're like wobbling, right? Would you rather have that? Pick your poison. What would a person rather have? They'd say nothing. We'll be greedy here, right? We'll be piggish here. We don't want anything. We don't want any difficulty. I want life to go smooth. I want life to be easy, right? That doesn't exist. A student came to Moshe Schneider, my Rebbe's Rebbe, a blessed memory, and said, I want a blessing. I want a blessing from the Rosh Yeshiva, from the head of the yeshiva. I want a blessing. So Rosh Yeshiva asked him, what's your blessing? What do you want? So he said, I want everything to go smooth. Right? His language was, I want it to all be glatt. I want it to be smooth. Very good. Yeah. I want it to be smooth. So he said, I can't give you a blessing like that. That is a blessing in vain. Right? In other words, no one's going to have it like that. What's going to be? Right? What's going to be? So he said, I'll give you a blessing that you'll have trials and tribulations and you'll be overcome them. He said, that's a true blessing. And everyone's going to have that. Everyone's going to have trials and tribulations. But the most important thing is, even when it's difficult, even when we feel we can't go on, let's see, our backs are to the wall. There's no one else to pray to except Avinu Shabashamayim, except our Father in heaven. Very good. But we got to remember, Rav Victor Miller wrote 250 things or more that he was thankful for. He had a whole list. Never had back pain. Had problems with his eyes. That problem with his feet. Like all these things he wrote down, he was thankful for. Never had digestive problems. Let's say when a person looks at a list like that, even 10 things you write down, 20 things you write down, no matter what a person goes through, you're thankful for what you have. It's not just, oh, I have nothing. I mean, some people will say this. Oh, it's not true, right? In their minds, it's true. They'll say, listen, I have nothing. Everything is bad. Doom and gloom and this and that. But it's not true. Are you living on the street starving? If you are, don't answer, right? Right? You don't have that. You don't go to sleep hungry. Now, there are plenty of people that do. Yeah. And there are plenty of people who suffer that way. Okay. So, if we'll look at it a different way. When a person is being tossed around, they're going to say, God hates me, right? God makes it so hard. Okay, makes it so hard. But God hates you? Not true. Why? What would God do if he really hated you? You say, he'd kill me. No, that's too easy, right? 1 second they're dead, whatever's going to happen afterwards, okay, right? But what could God do? to show that he doesn't care. And this, everyone will say, I'll take this position. What can God do? He can say, okay, I'm going to make you hit the lottery. I'm going to give you a business deal. You're going to make millions. You're going to say, where's the test in that? How does that show that God hates me? I'm not saying anyone, who's got money, that's necessarily the case. But why would God give someone necessarily a lot of money? One reason is, let's say, they've done one mitzvah in their life, God has to reward them, right? For whatever mitzvah they've done. They'll get the reward in this world, not in the next world, right? So in other words, God can say, okay, I don't have anything to do with you in this world. I don't want you to pray to me. I don't want you to thank me. I don't want you to make blessings to me. I don't want anything from you. So what am I going to do? I'll give you a good business deal. I'll make you hit the lottery, right? Give you an inheritance, whatever it is. Because I know you're not going to use it for the right thing. I'm going to put you so far away, you're not going to have any connection to me. And that's what happened with the snake, right? The primordial snake, the evil inclination, whatever it was. Snake comes along, entices Eve. She gives to Adam. God says, okay, everyone out of the pool. They ate from tree of knowledge where they weren't supposed to, brought death to the world. Very good. So what happened over here? So God says, what's going on? So Adam says, passes the buck, says, it's not my fault. Eve gave to me. Eve says, it's not my fault. It was a snake. The snake enticed me. So God looks at the snake and says, okay, I'm punishing everybody. For man, what's the punishment? You have to work by the sweat of your brow, right? You have to work hard for your livelihood. For Eve, what's her punishment? And for women in general, punishment is going to be, they're going to have difficulty in childbirth. They're going to have difficulty raising kids. Yeah, the snake, what's the punishment? God chops off its legs, and God says that you're going to have food the rest of your life. You're going to slither around, you're going to have food the rest of your life. Where's the punishment? Snake has food for the rest of its life. It's never going to be wanting for food. Always going to have food. Always going to be able to eat things. All right, it may not taste so good because, sandy, whatever. Okay, but that doesn't matter. The snake is always going to be fed. Never going to have a problem. So where's the curse? So the curse is when a person has everything, they don't need God. They need to pray to him. They don't need anything. They're the self-made person or snake or whatever. They don't need anything. So if they don't need anything, that's the curse. That is exactly the curse. Because the person will say, I did all this, right? Guy being conceited. They'll say, I did all this. Like someone once told me, he said, I became who I am despite my parents. I'm like, oh, really? You took yourself out of the womb, right? You took care of all your needs. You bathed yourself. You sent yourself to school. You cooked for yourself when you were born. That's impressive. So I know what they meant. Parents may, not have been maybe the greatest educators in the world, could be. But it's pretty arrogant to say, I'm the self-made person. I made my own money. I was, I get all this money, use all my brain power, this, that. Anyone can do it, right? Anyone should be able to do it. So they're arrogant. They say, look what I did. Now you think for 1 second they're praying to God for anything? Nothing. God's given it to them, and he's given it to them in a major way. And because he gives it to them in a major way, they have no need for him. Right? What do secular Jews a lot of times say about religious Jews? Let's say about Bali Tshuva. We'll pick on Bali Tshuva, right? Returnees to Judaism. What do they say? They say you must have been missing something in life. You needed something, something to fall back on, as if to say, I don't need anything. I've taken myself out of the womb. I don't need anything. So what does God do? God takes, big hands, right? We anthropomorphize here. God takes big hands and goes, boom! He pushes them out, right? Pushes them out. And he says, I don't have anything to do with you. It's not a coincidence, also, I'm on this topic, not a coincidence where the Reform and conservative movement, or any of these movements, they have a ton of money. Tons of money. Right? The UJA, the UJC, the United Jewish Appeal, United Jewish Congress. Back in the day, they raised over $500 million, probably by $1 billion by now. Right? Or maybe it's less because, the economic situation today, but let's say, they raised a ton of money. And most of the money, what's being used for? Garbage. I would say, like, how many trees can you plant, in Israel, like, for the JNF before the Arabs burn them down? Right, this happened the other day. Wednesday. It was Wednesday. There was a fire. Right, it was a massive fire. Probably about, I don't know, half an hour, 25 minutes from where I live. Like, blocked up roads, left and right. So comes out pretty much that it was arson. Right, and a lot of these fires are arson. Yeah, so like as quickly as people, plant trees and this and that, Arabs are going to come burn them down. Jews don't burn down their own trees, right? Usually. So, I don't get that. Yeah, whatever. It's a side point, but we got to think, in general. And again, people have hard lives. Everybody has hard lives. No one gets off scot-free. There's no free lunch, but we got to look at what we do have. You see, it's very easy to be negative. Extremely easy to be negative. This is bad. I know some people like this. Talking to them is like doom and gloom. Not to say the world's going to end, but like everything's bad. Yeah, every last thing is bad. They're not worrying like where the next meal's coming from. They're not, health issues, minor. Even though, let's say, these people I'm thinking about are, much older. Okay. Yeah. But everything is bad. Everything is bad. Right? You don't see the bigger picture. And what should the bigger picture show? Bigger picture shows, when I grew up around adults, as a kid, and people would say all the time, and these were people, let's say in their 40s, right? So when I was a kid, and they would say, like, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Right? There's truth to that. There is some truth to that. Right? But the reality is, even if a person struggles with health, if they look at it the right way, they realize what a blessing it is, and what a blessing health is, and how to look at the world. Other people can get demoralized by it. Okay. Right? But the question, the question is that most people, even if they have a lot, they don't really have anything. Right? I spoke about this last time in Pirkei Avos. Right? Somebody's got, a ton of money, wants a prestigious country club, this and that, has no connection to his kids. Very little connection to his kids. And, I think in the bigger scheme of things, bottom line, doesn't really care. Doesn't really bother them so much because they got this other big life. Okay, their kids are what they are. No great shakes. Okay, whatever. Whatever's going to be with them, but they have no connection. Not looking back and saying, "Oh, I feel so bad. I could have done this. I could have done that." Not at all. Not 1 ounce of remorse. And if they had to do it over again, they do the exact same thing. I don't think there's any doubt. I put all the money I don't have down on the table and say that's what the person would say. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. That's who they are. That is who they are. It's very sad. Right? Extremely sad. Right? Self-made man, look who I, hobnob with and this and that. It's arrogance. Right? Which, by the way, the ways of the righteous, right? The Orthodox Tzaddikim, he says in the gate of Gaiva, of being conceited, he says it's the base of all bad character traits. All bad character traits stem from this. Yeah, so the person can have everything, and things were turned upside down for a while. His wife had cancer, came through it. I got a car accident, lucky to be alive, this and that, but it didn't change them. There were major wake up calls, didn't change them. Didn't say, "Wow, so glad to be alive, so glad to have what I have." It didn't change them. God has to do certain things to us to wake us up. For some people, it's like dropping a nuclear bomb on them, and they won't change. They absolutely won't change. Yeah. So why does God do it? He still gives them an opportunity. Can't say I didn't give you an opportunity. you know, he's like, listen, you had to swerve off the road, flipped over, and he broke your back and this and that. I could have killed you. I didn't. That was a wake up call. You didn't see it. Gave your wife cancer. That wasn't a wake up call either, right? You didn't come back to me. She didn't come back to me. But so why God waste your time? Waste his time. Again, if I were playing God, come on. I gave you some, I give you things all the time to see, to witness. I gave you a world of design. Abraham came to that conclusion at the age of 3, the age of 40 or older. And he said there must be a designer. It can't be random. Very good. And he convinced most of the world, not to be idolatrous. Okay. How do other people not see that? Right? So that's the age-old question. I asked somebody once many years ago. It's going to write a book on people who became religious. Jews that became religious, going to write a book on it. Different stories. So I asked this person the following question, which I asked everybody, which I asked a number of people. So where did the change come? How did it happen? So the person became religious in the 30s. Became religious in their 30s. They had 4 kids. All the kids became religious also. And so I asked them, I said, so tell me the story. How did it happen? So this person told me, he said, that's not the question. You're asking the wrong question. I said, okay, so what's the right question? What's the right question? And he said, my siblings and I saw the same thing. Why did they not go the same direction I did? We saw the exact same thing. Right? It's very interesting. Yeah, 2 people see the same thing, totally different conclusions. Because of my wife, right, secular Jew, many years ago, we were talking. And I said, what are the odds? What are the odds? And this was after the Gulf War, right? I said, what are the odds? What are the odds 39 Scud missiles don't hit anything? I asked them, what are the odds? I said, if you tell me, and this was being shot pretty close. So I said, you tell me 1 or 2 things. Either you got, they were hitting open areas, not causing any damage. Now, if you tell me, 1 doesn't hit anything, okay. This is before Patriot missiles knock them out. Yeah, this is before that. So here, I got almost clean shot here. 1 doesn't hit anything open field. This was a very small place, no bigger than the size of the state of New Jersey. Very small place. And you got major cities here. So you tell me 1 doesn't hit. Okay. You tell me 2 don't hit. Okay. You tell me 3 don't hit. Okay, now I'm getting a little bit nervous. 3 don't hit anything? Okay. You tell me 4, 5, 6. You tell me 10 don't hit anything. I would put, again, all the money I don't have on the table and say that's impossible. 33% chance or more that you're not going to hit anything. You're not going to hit, you're not going to hit a school. You're not going to hit a house. You're not going to hit a building. They're all going to end up in the south and the negative where there's nothing there. Like, come on. The odds are like 0. Right? So, so this person takes off his watch, probably Casio back in the day, starts pushing buttons on his calculator. And he's like, that could happen. I'm like, what if the odds are 1 in a billion? What if the odds are 1 in a trillion that could happen? 39? I mean, that's pretty incredible. Yeah. So the person said, basically I still have free choice. It could happen. I said, would you put all your money down on the table and say, and bet that that's going to happen? 39? Take it a step further. You had, you had 300 missiles and drones that came from Iran. The Patriots go and take out about half of them. That's what they said. And they were working with another system. They knocked out all of them. All of them. Which a lot of higher ups, some of the American military and other places said impossible. Impossible. According to nature. We're all the religious people. So where are all the religious people now? They hear about an open miracle. This is an open miracle. right? So we say, Ein doima ria l'shmiya. There's no comparison seeing something than hearing about it. Now, what's the proof for that? Go back to Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro in the book of Exodus. So there it says, V'yishma Yisro. Yisro heard. What did he hear? What did he hear? So Rashi says he heard about the split into the sea and the war of Amalek. Doesn't say he heard about the miracles and all that. That's what he heard. And he says, I want to join the Jewish people. Now you have to understand, he was the main idolater of Midian, right? It wasn't an idol he hadn't worshipped. And then he says, okay, this is all this other stuff doesn't mean anything, right? It means nothing. He says, this is the one true God. Now, it says Yisro heard. Very good. What about the rest of the world? Now, Yisro, there's a whole difference of opinion. Did he come before the Torah or after the Torah? Because how many came before the Torah, right? So maybe, he heard it much clearer. He was there. He's around. If he heard it after the Torah, okay, it's later. In either case, even if he heard it later, then the whole world hear. Doesn't God say the whole world's going to know my power, my might? Right? So difference of opinion here. Some say God did the miracles, for the sake of the Egyptians, show his power, and to the other nations. Right? That's pretty clear. Others say it wasn't just to them, it was also to the Jewish people. So the Jewish people attached themselves to him. Okay. The whole world heard. So if the whole world heard, you have the converts came out of Egypt or other places, what we call the mixed multitude. They're the ones that, serve the golden calf, and all that. So you can ask what happened to them. Okay, we're not going to get there, but, you can ask that question. But think about it. They're the only ones that came. Why did the whole world become Jewish at this point? Right? They could have joined. The Ramchal says that was the last chance. Anyone who wanted to join the Jewish people, they could have come up until the time of Mount Sinai. But it's only given really in the Tower of Babel. That was really the cutoff point. But the Ramchal there says, Derech Hashem, he says that God gave an opportunity even later. Even up until the giving of the Torah of Mount Sinai. So they had a chance. They had a golden opportunity. Anyone could have joined. Why didn't they join? Why don't we have 500 billion Jews today? Yeah, why didn't the whole world join? First of all, everyone's got free choice. Not everyone was supposed to be Jewish. Okay. Why didn't tens of thousands, why didn't millions of people join after they hear about these miracles? Why didn't they join? What's the simple answer? Simple answer is that what? They heard it. They didn't see it. Seeing, as we say, is believing. Hearing about it, okay, sounds very nice. Yeah, sounds beautiful. Doesn't mean someone's going to jump on a plane and come. Right? And, people live outside the land and, people hear about, all these, missile attempts and, all kinds of things. They're kind of out of whack because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to feel it, so to speak. They're not in it. They're not in it. Okay. So with all these things, hearing about something is not the same as seeing it. But we'll take it one step further. Right? I'm going to take questions in a second, right? But we'll take it one step further. Okay, so what about the greatest generation in the history of man? They saw God face to face on Mount Sinai, whatever that means. Yeah, the greatest generation that comes out of Egypt, and only 20% come out of Egypt, 80% die after the plague of darkness. Yeah. So if 20% come out, this is the greatest generation in the history of the Jewish people. Why do they complain? They complain, we missed the fish. Imagine, we missed the fish in Auschwitz. We missed the fish in Egypt. We want meat. We want the watermelon. All these great things. What are you talking about? God took you out of Egypt. You don't remember how bad it was? You're getting beaten down with an inch of your life, working like dogs, working like slaves. You forgot about that? And then send out the spies, right? Send out the spies. They say we're grasshoppers in their eyes. and it all looks bad. And they complain, they speak bad against the land of Israel. Because of that, they're punished 40 years. 40 years in the desert. They could have gone straight in the promised land. Yeah, makes the question much stronger. What are they complaining about? This is the greatest generation in the history of man. So someone's going to say, if that's the case, we're in serious trouble. Okay, we're a much weaker generation. That's true. But this doesn't make any sense, logically. And you got the story of Korah, right? Korah wasn't a dummy. I want to be the Kohen Gadol. But God says, you're not supposed to be the Kohen Gadol. You're not supposed to be the high priest. Moses showing favoritism. He wasn't a dummy here. Was not a dummy. Jealousy literally took him out of this world. It's hard to understand. He convinced 250 great people, right? So in that sense, he saw it. He was the one, one of the people who held the ark. He didn't die. He was on a very high level. So what happened over here? If you tell me it's something, people heard, and they're far away, it doesn't say resonate. They didn't see it with their own eyes. Okay. So I could understand. I could potentially understand. Yeah, they didn't, they didn't get the message. They didn't get the message. Ain't doing a real shmiya. There's no comparison if you see it rather than hear it. Okay. That I could hear. That I could hear. What if you saw it? You witnessed the miracles in Egypt. You didn't, and you were part of the 20% that came out. To get all these good things going for you. You saw God face to face at Mount Sinai. Such great experience, right? All the people died by the first of the 10 Commandments, by the second 10 Commandments, God brings it back to life. Some say they did it with all the 10 Commandments. Some say after the first two, they said, Moses, you hear it's too much for us. You hear it, then we'll give it over. Give it over to us. Okay. But they saw it. If they saw it, how in the world can they think it's better to be in Egypt? How can they say we missed the fish? We missed the watermelon? Impossible. You would think. So one explanation says when Moshe Feinstein, a blessed memory. Moshe Feinstein was a Torah giant, the last generation in America. It would have been a Torah giant anywhere, right? And he brings down in Drash Moshe, his commentary on Chumash. In Parshas Korach, what does he say? So Moshe said, you know what? Korach wasn't a fool. He wasn't a fool, so why did he make such a mistake? Look at everything he went. Came out of Egypt, right? Saw the miracles. Saw the manna fall, right? Saw, God give 10 commandments. He saw all these things. He's not a dummy by any stretch. So what happened? How in the world, see, if he comes out against Moshe Rabbeinu, they'll kill him. Why would they kill him? Because he's coming out against the king. Moshe Rabbeinu, known as the first king. Very good. So doesn't come out against Moshe Rabbeinu. Comes out against Aaron. Comes out against Moshe playing protexia, giving him, he's got connections. So he became the high priest, not him. Not Korah. He said, I got just as good lineage. I should have been made the high priest. I want to be the high priest. Says Moshe Feinstein. What happened to Korah? He didn't get the message. Maybe he didn't get the message. He didn't internalize the message. Yeah. Everything he saw kind of like just went. He didn't internalize. He didn't put it inside of him. He didn't work on it. Yeah, lack of emunah, you can call it that, call it a number of things, but he didn't get the message. Right? And there are plenty of people, even if they see open miracles, they don't get the message. Because the Brisker Rav says, someone came to him, Rav Yisrael said, Soloveitchik, bless the memory, someone came to him from America and said, Rebbe, if there would be more open miracles, more people in America would come back, become religious Jews. Right? So says the Brisker Rav, not true. Why? He says the only way that's going to happen is if they're a vessel. They have to be growing in spiritual terms. If they're growing in spiritual terms, yeah, then it'll help. If they're not going if they're not growing in spiritual terms, no matter what God does, even if he does open miracles, will not affect them. Right? It's a pretty amazing statement. Yeah, so I'll tell you a story. A woman, the book is called The Book A View from Above. A woman, it's really a woman, it's on some construction site. She gets clocked on the head by a beam, 5 stories up, 6 stories up. She has an out-of-body experience. An out-of-body experience, right? Should have been dead, and whatever reason, she comes back to her body. Now, she was a secular Jew. Secular Jew at this point. Now, if I remember correctly, it took her 7 years. 7 years to become an Orthodox Jew. Now you tell me, okay, she had to go through rehabilitation, other things. What happened? Why did it take 7 years? Open miracle here. She should have been dead, no question. And not only that, she says exactly what the Zohar says, what Kabbalah says. First, she saw her life flash before her eyes. All right, her soul hovered above the body. She was in that spiritual world. She saw things that, very hard to explain, but she felt the absolute truth there, whatever. But it took her 7 years. Yeah. Now, even if you tell me it took her 6 months, a year, let's say, rehabilitation, let's say. Right? I don't remember the timeline here, but let's say. What happened for 6 years? Why didn't she change overnight? Now, if her family was secular and everyone's convincing her, like, just, lead a normal life, don't question things, and you're lucky and just live life to the fullest, you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, had an effect. Cooled her down, right? Cooled her down, so to speak. But it took her 7 years, right? If I remember correctly, 7 years. So just because a person sees, let's say, according to everybody, it's an open miracle, it does not mean the person will change overnight. As the Brisker Rav says, you have to be a vessel. You have to be willing to see it. If you're not willing to see it, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what God does. Right, essentially. All right, let me take some questions here. We're told that if a man is feminine, should work not that way. Listen, by extension, how about that isn't how it ought to be, right? In other words, should we make the necessary correction? So let's say like this. We're not, as we said before, we are not in control very much. We do, essentially, we do have free will. I don't think there's any question. Free will, I think, is more limited, but we do have, we definitely have free will. That is true. At the end of the day, some people are claiming, which is, without getting into, any Kabbalistic sources, there are people that'll claim I am in the wrong body. That's what they'll claim. They'll claim I'm in the wrong body. Yeah. In other words, if the guy feels more feminine, or if he's feminine, or if she's feminine, she feels like, she should be a guy. Right. So without going into, changing sexes, whatever, which is forbidden, which is totally forbidden, can someone in general, I don't think that's what you're asking, but I'm going to just take it to this extent. And the question would be, is that really true? Can that be true? Can a person be in the wrong body? Could a male be in a feminine body? Right? Or sorry, can a male soul be feminine? Right? We'll ask like that. Right? We'll ask like that. You have, let's say you have somebody like Sarah Imenu. She couldn't have kids. Right? 10 years, she couldn't have kids. So the Gemara says, why couldn't she have kids? According to one opinion, she'd have a womb. If you don't have a womb, I mean, it's biology, right? Biology 101 will keep this clean, right? But if you don't have a womb, you don't have kids, right? Just not going to happen. So what did God do? So instead of calling her Sarai, God changes her name right? Changes Avram's name to Avraham, right? The Yud Hey is half of God's name, but he changed her nature, right? Kind of like, Sarah laughed, like, come on, 90 years old, like, this is an impossibility. But even when she was 30, it was an impossibility, according to nature, according to that opinion, right? Total impossibility, because above nature, right? Now, it can be, according to Kabbalah, it can be, I mean, we're not going to go into this, but it could be that you can have a quote unquote female soul and a male. Now, is that the manifestation of transgender today? No. Right? I've heard many people say, again, I'm not, an expert, by any stretch, right? But what I do see in a lot of cases is that there's something wrong. It's a mental illness. 100% a mental illness. Yeah, it's not a normal, it's not a normal thing, right? Even the time we're going to get there in verse 8, in later in the chapter about homosexuality, also not a normal desire. No matter what people say, it's not a normal desire, right? Torah says it's forbidden. It's like any forbidden relationship. But the Torah makes clear, the book of Genesis, the Torah makes clear that a man is going to cleave to a woman. Doesn't say he's going to cleave to another man, right? But again, in general, if that would be the norm, quote unquote, you wouldn't have children today. You say, no, maybe they be both. Maybe they be bi, they be homosexual and heterosexual. It doesn't really go that way, right? But it wouldn't mean they're going to change gender. That's just not normal, right? It's just, I don't care what anyone says. It's just not normal, right? Even someone who's gay, right? Torah says it's forbidden, 100% it's forbidden, right? Certainly to act on it, think about it, it's forbidden, right? At the same time, it's not really the act is forbidden. Thinking about it's like thinking about any forbidden, relationship or anything like that. It's also forbidden to think about. We won't get death penalty for it, but only on the action. But even so, the Torah makes very clear. Okay, so they say I don't hold to the Bible. I think the Bible is man-made. I think they hate women. I think they hate non-Jews. They're anti-pig. They're anti-this. Okay. Yeah, they don't hold by the Bible. Okay. So what is a normal relationship? What is a normal relationship? Up to the last 20 years, or maybe a little bit more, the normal relationship was between a man and a woman. That was a normal relationship. And to have kids, it's with a man and a woman. Now you have some women, getting older, they don't have kids, so they do in vitro. I know somebody like this, someone I grew up with, no marriage partners coming along. And yeah, they did in vitro, they have a child. They're raising a child by themselves. Okay. Yeah. But normally you need a man and a woman together. Right? So if men would act on this, if this was normal, quote unquote, what would happen with the next generation? You say, well, some of them will be heterosexual. I don't know. If they're really not attracted to women, they're not quote unquote going to perform to have a child, they're not going to do that. It's like they'd rather slit their eyeballs than do it. They're not attracted to women. Right? So so you say, fine. Today you don't need men. Right? You do need men to a certain extent. Right? But they can do in vitro. Okay. Now, how many people are going to go through that? Even just to have a child? I don't know. I don't think the masses. I've only heard of a couple cases. I mean, maybe I hang out with the wrong people, but I've only heard of a few cases that women did this because they wanted to have a child. Now, if that was the norm, it had all these men, that were gay, that'd be a disaster, be an absolute disaster. And there's an obligation for non-Jews also to procreate, right? To have kids, you need a next generation. You can have kids 10 years apart, doesn't matter for a non-Jew. Jew is a different issue, but for a non-Jew, you got an obligation to populate the world. Very good. You got to populate the world. If you don't populate the world, what's going to be? You won't have a next generation. right? Again, this is just how it goes. This is how it goes. But people in the know, people in the field, for a number of people speak about it. It's just it's not normal here. Transgender thing is not normal. I'm not saying being gay is either. They'll say I'm not attracted to women, this, that, but there's something seriously messed up with that mentality. And it's and most people, I've heard this many times also, most people who are of that quote unquote persuasion, most people themselves wish they weren't. They wish they weren't. They wish they were quote unquote normal. Now, what does normal mean? So today, normal, might have a totally different definition. But what does normal today mean? What should it mean? In general, it means a man or woman. Right? The definition has changed over the last, let's say, 20 years. Yeah. But up until this point, it's been the same. You can say it's sexist, it doesn't matter. That's the way it's been. It's a new era. It's a new generation. People think in a different way. People, look at their bodies different. Okay. Yeah. Look into the possibility. I think it's wrong. Right? But think about it. Throughout the millennium, that wasn't the case. Throughout history, that wasn't the case. Was never the case. You had people that were gay. I mean, whatever. I mean, Torah says that's forbidden, so it must have existed. It existed in other cultures. Okay. But not to this extent. This extent has gone way overboard. But everyone agrees, should agree that, even from the history of time, you'll say this has existed. But what is quote unquote the normal existence today? Or should be throughout the generations, a man or woman. I mean, it's kind of pathetic. You have to have the president of the United States sign into legislation. There are two genders. And it's crazy. You forget whatever you think about him, doesn't matter. But to make such a statement, and you got to be out there in the world and tell the masses, 300 million people, there are two genders. No, they're not. Well, I'll make a legislation. Only two genders. I mean, it's been two genders for, since the beginning of time. It hasn't changed. You had cases where you couldn't tell what the gender was, or they had both. They had both sides, a man and a woman. Okay, Mishnah talks about it. Gemara talks about it. You have cases today. Yeah, it's rare, but, you can't have cases like that today. That a person was born with both. They have to make a decision. It's either going to be one or the other. Can't, it's not going to live very long, having both. It's going to be very uncomfortable in many ways. Right? Again, we'll keep this conversation clean here. But the point, is that even with some of these mess ups, well, what's the norm? The norm is, how do you know you're in the wrong body? Maybe you're in the wrong body. That's the norm. That's not brainwashing. That's education. Again, could it be that a person who's a male has a female soul? Could be. According to Kabbalah, that could be. Okay. But again, it's most people that speak about it, that are in the know, deal with these type of people. There are things, there are things that they're not normal. They've gone through other traumas and different things that, again, I'm not here to judge. I'm just telling you what the Torah says here. Right? It's a horrific thing that someone have to go through. I don't think there's any question. But, usually something, usually has been some sexual abuse or something traumatic has happened that's made a person question this. Yeah, question themselves. Or let's say, I know someone, I don't know all the details, but I know someone that, is a woman that, I don't know, was taken advantage of and different things, and only now wants to identify as a male. Yeah, I don't know if they did any operations or not. It doesn't really interest me, but in general, something dramatic normally happens, for someone to do that. Because that's way out of the realm of reality. It's not, it's not the norm. Today it's the norm. That's never been the norm. Even if homosexuality existed, okay, it existed. And it still exists. Okay. It doesn't mean that's the norm. And even if, just on this topic, we spoke about the psyche of a person, even if a person was born with such a gene, doctor once told me this, there's a gene, they've never proven it. They've never proven it. There's a homosexual gene. Yeah. They say, what do you want? People are born that way. It's not true. I had someone yell and scream at me and say, this person, that's the way it is, that's the way they were born. And as they're yelling and screaming, I said, by the way, it's never been proven. Still never been proven. That was the only answer I gave. I don't care. Right? They kept going on. I don't care. That's the way it is. Person's born that way. I said, but they never proved it. And even if they did, this is my answer. Even if they did, what's the difference between someone born that way with that type of gene, with another type of gene? We're going to call it an anger gene. We're going to call it, I don't want to wake up and pray gene. I'm going to call it, I don't want to eat 3 pounds of matzah in 35 seconds, the whistle Dixie gene. Yeah, we had all kinds of bad genes. Let's say, so why did God give them to us? Why did he put it as part of our DNA to work on it? But it's very hard to overcome. Doesn't matter. You're given a certain disposition. Okay. So what's the difference with this? You'll say, okay, it's not a normal thing, and how can a person fight it? People can be helped. There are psychologists out there that can help people, that have helped people. Well, not impossible. Definitely not impossible. Yeah. But again, it's like any other. It's like any other desire. You have good desires, you get bad desires, you get weird desires. Okay. The Torah says we're gonna get there. One day, bestiality is forbidden. Yeah. How many people out there that are having fun with animals? You probably say not too many. Say, oh, that's so gross, disgusting. Okay. Right? Not gonna disagree. Fine. Right? You know how Cleopatra died? Mark Antony? She died, they dropped a horse on her. She's gonna have relations with the horse. Yeah, what happens? They dropped the horse on her, she died. Horse, crushed her. I don't know. Depends how you want to go. That's how she died. Right? So, when the Torah says this is forbidden, I say, oh, it's so disgusting. Why does the Torah say such a thing? Right? Because the Torah understood. People are going to have this desire. And it's a forbidden desire. Right? The weird desire also. Some things weirder than others. This is like, I'm sure, most people, in this world, I mean, I can't imagine how many people they know that do this with animals. I have a hard time imagining. They say, oh, wow, it's such a common thing. It's like every other person. They're not even close. I don't know what the stats are. I don't really care, but it can't be a high percentage. But it doesn't mean it's not forbidden. It's a very strange thing. We're going off from Bilam also, right? Bilam, the evil, non-Jewish prophet, right? How did he want to get the most amount of impurities? He shacked up with his donkey, right? When he kicks the donkey, if the donkey like crouches him into a wall because he sees an angel, with an angel with a fiery sword, and like Bilam screams at the donkey, like, "Come on, we've been together for so long. Like, how could you do this?" Like, crushed his leg in the process, right? So the commentary said, "What do you mean you've been together so long?" He's like, "Oh, I've been my trusted donkey for years." Oh yeah, trusted in what way? Yeah, in the carnal way. Not just he took him around and wherever he went, hopped on his donkey and his donkey went with him. Okay, it's also true. It's also true, but you understand who this type of person was. I mean, he's talking evil incarnate and and all that. So he wanted like the most amount of impurities possible. Right? Well, he wasn't a dummy by any stretch. Right? He was able to figure out the exact time, split second God got angry and and be able to curse the Jewish people and get them in trouble. I mean, some say at some level he's he's as great as Moshe Rabbeinu in prophecy. Some level. Yeah, that was very hard to understand, but yeah. So you take somebody like that, wants all the impurity. What does he do? What does he do to get more impurity inside of him, more of this garbage inside of him? What does he do? So that's what he does, right? Shacks up with his animal, right? So again, these things are multiple levels here, of exactly what's exactly what's going on. Someone asked before, I want to deal with this now. Someone asked, I heard someone say it was an evil inclination told Abraham to sacrifice his son. Heard from kosher rabbis, it was God who asked. Who said it was the evil inclination? Right? Who said it was the evil inclination? God. So there's a discussion God has with the Sultan, with the evil inclination. And the Sultan says, he gave everything to Isaac, he gave him the son, he didn't thank you enough, you should really, punish him. You should really punish him. And what does God say? If I were to ask him to sacrifice, he would do it. So the evil inclination says, great, do it. Test him. And he gets tested. Right? Right? If you look at the Torah itself, literally the Torah says God tested him. Why did God test him? Why did God test him? So Ramban says he had to fulfill his legacy. Right? What does it mean to fulfill his legacy? He had 9 tests, right? Came out of fiery furnace, right? He had to leave everything he knew. There's a famine, his wife had to be taken, he had to fight 5 world powers, saves only remaining relative loads. They go to circumcision. He went through 9 tests. 9 tests. Everyone agreed he had a legacy. He had a pedigree. He had a legacy. So Ramban says, but his legacy would not have been solidified had it not been for the last test. Yeah. So I would have said, again, for what it's worth, I would have said, give him the legacy. Don't make him go through the test. He's going to do it anyway. God knows past, present, and future. So if God knows past, present, and future, he knows. He knows what he's going to do. So give him credit. It's only one problem. Can't give him credit. He didn't do it. Someone asked me last week, but doesn't it say if you want to do the mitzvah, you get credit even if you didn't do it. Good. This wasn't, okay, God commanded him to do it. It's not one of the 13 commandments. Sacrifice your son, that's forbidden. But God gave him a specific command. Very good. So I would have said, for what it's worth, my opinion would have been, so let him do it. Give him the credits. Give him the credits. Comes on the Ramban. The Ramban says I can't. Can't give him the credit, God says. Why not? Why can God not give him the credit? Because he didn't do it. Unreached potential is unreached potential. But again, I would say very simple. He's got a legacy right now. He's got a huge legacy. No one doubts the legacy. If nobody doubts the legacy, why make him go through it? Right? He's got the legacy. Comes along the Ramban and says, okay, he's got the legacy, but you know what? His legacy is going to be solidified by going through the last test. He has to go through the last test. Mind-boggling. I never would have said that. I would have said, leave him alone. Pick up someone your own size, right? Leave him alone. He went through all these other things. Don't make him go through that. But says the Ramban, he would not have had that legacy. That legacy, he wouldn't have had. So God tested him, but why did he test him? Right? This is the question. It says God tested him. Why did he test him? Because he had this discussion with the evil inclination, with Mr. S. They had a whole discussion. And the evil inclination says, I didn't praise you enough, this, that, And God says, if I would take away his son, if I would tell him to sacrifice his son, he'd do it. Right? So Mr. S says, prove it. Let's see. Do it. And God came to him. Right? And God came to him. Someone here says, I don't think an out-of-body experience makes you automatically an Orthodox Jew. The people who claim they saw Yeshua, Muhammad. Okay, I'm talking about a Jew over here. And non-Jews said the same thing, by the way. They see their life flash before their eyes. They see their soul hover over the body. They see different things. How can they see that if we believe it's not true? That's a good question. Right? Maybe the whole thing's made up. Okay. Right? But again, if someone is in that world, let's say, and they know what absolute truth is, because that'll be clear as day. Their soul will know exactly what absolute truth is. So if the soul comes back in the body, it's a Jewish soul, right? Let's say. So if it's a Jewish soul, no matter how far that soul is from the truth, that's been from the truth, it cannot be the same person. Cannot be the same person. Now, you're right. It's not going to happen overnight. I'm asking why. Not because, oh, maybe this person saw Yashki, this other person saw Muhammad. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about they were in that world. They saw absolute truth. It's clear they saw absolute truth. Now, if they saw absolute truth, you know this is God's, right? You know what's going on in that spiritual world. You know now your life is a fraud with a capital F. Yeah, you know what's going on and what's going to be. Very hard to say you're going to be the same person. So when God slaps the soul back in the body, otherwise this person dies. If he slaps the soul back in the body, what can happen? What would I think would happen over time? The person should come close to God and should change. That's what should happen, right? You're right. I'm asking the question, why does it happen overnight? That's what I'm asking. In other words, after the initial thing that happens, tell me they have to go through rehabilitation, they have to go through, they have to go through other things, right? Whatever it may be, right? They have to go through all these things. Yeah, in order to get better, to get healthy. Okay, I can hear that. But how much time, this person is going to think, what did I just go through? What did I just see? What did I just hear? How can I live my life like this? Again, I would think, and again, this is just me, I would think, come on, that's a major wake-up call. But remember, if you have an epiphany, right, if you have like a spiritual epiphany, you hold on to it for dear life because it doesn't last very long. Because after that, you go back to everyday life. When you go back to everyday life, you forget what you went through. There's the story of a teenager. It was a teenager who had an out-of-body experience, and he wasn't religious. And there were rabbis, working with him. So someone asked the question. This video, it says, why is he in yeshiva? Why don't you send him to yeshiva? Now, this kid knew nothing from nothing at this point. So one of the rabbis said, you got to cut him some slack. He's going to get there. We're working with him, but it's not overnight. It's not an overnight process, right? You got to deal with family. You got to deal with his environment. I mean, there are a lot of things. And I guarantee, in this woman's case, in the book of View from Above, family played a major role. Society played a major role. You'll get over it. Don't worry about it. Don't think too much into it, right? It's the same thing. When a person, let's say, a secular Jew becomes, interested in Judaism and wants to come back, or even a former Christian, or a Christian's got questions. What are friends and family trying to do? Be normal. Never forget what he thinks. And someone once told me, the father tells him, come on, I've been in the church for more than 50 years. You think they've been lying to me? Yes, they have been. No offense. They've been lying to you. Right? Could imagine such a thing. So who's going to try and convince you the other way? Family, friend, right? You might say they're well-meaning. I don't know if they're well-meaning. They want you to be normal. They want you to go out with them, see a movie, have a beer, have fun. Let yourself go. That's what they want. They want you to be like everybody else. They don't want you to be strange. They don't be, reading these, ancient texts or listen to all these videos and, all this hocus pocus, this and that. They would have got me a nice steak. Go out and have a nice time. That's what they want. And they'll break you down more than you make them religious. Right? That's why when it comes to family and friends, they may go out the window in this process. I'm not saying 100%, but that might be the case. Might be a very lonely process, even for a secular Jew who becomes religious, right? Family could just, have nothing to do with you. A friend of mine, I went to college with, parents cut him off straight away, early 20s. Thought he was in a cult, this, that. His father died, never met his wife and kids. Mother did. They totally cut him off. They don't want anything to do with it. You're in a cult, you're in this, you're in that. But again, people make comments, and I just think it's ironic. People talk very strongly about things they don't know anything about. And I think, I had people say this to me, you're in a cult. I said, thank God. But my answer was, do you really know what a cult is? If I wanted to, I could leave anytime. Nothing holding me. If I found out, God forbid, one aspect of the Torah wasn't true, we're back to eating ham sandwiches. What's the problem? We never keep any of it. If I knew it wasn't true. In a cult, they don't let you think. You brainwash. You say, oh, you've been brainwashed here. Thank God. Right? But the question always is, did God speak on Mount Sinai or he didn't? And if he did, what does he want from us? Right? Now, some people would ask, is it really the same Torah, that we have that I'm going to speak about later, my conversion class on 13 principles, right? Okay, you get some people ask that question. But for a lot of people, they don't care. You spoke, you didn't speak, doesn't have any relevance. Oh, that's a lot of relevance today. More relevance than it ever has, right? In many ways. But people want to do what they want to do. They don't care. They don't care if it's true or not true. They want to live a life that's onerous. They have no responsibility. I can get up when I want. I can say what I want. I can do what I want. That's it. There are people out there angry at God for different things. Kill the parent very young. Let's say, at different hardships, so that they'll blame him and they'll say I have nothing to do with it. But they weren't that religious at the beginning anyway. So it's kind of an excuse. But what's the single biggest thing stopping people? Jews in general. I'm not talking about non-Jews here, but Jews, what's stopping them? They want to do whatever they want. They do not want to be subservient to anything. So who are they subservient to? Themselves. Desire. That's idolatry. That's why the Rambam says, beginning in 13 principles of faith, either you believe in God or you believe in idols. There's nothing in between. Well, it's kind of extreme. You say, well, the Rambam was extremist. Okay. Yeah. So what? Right? But at the end of the day, he's right. Because if you don't believe in God and that God runs the world and I have an obligation to serve him, then what do? So you tell me I do whatever my heart tells me. Not what my mind tells me. See, there's a big difference. The mind can really know the difference between right and wrong. Well, what does the heart do? And that's probably see next week. What does the heart do? The heart, the mind, the mind, the eyes see and the heart covets. So the mind may know the right thing to do, right? Speak about this a lot. The mind might actually know the right thing to do, which probably most people it's not the case. Yeah. But deep down, the mind knows what's right and wrong. But what does the heart do? Convinces you otherwise. Come on, I'll do this, I'll do that. I'll do the other thing. So what if it's kind of illegal? Okay. Hopefully you don't get caught, you make a lot of money, everything's great. Yeah. So the heart gets caught up in what? Prestige, honor, fame, all these things that are bad for you. But doesn't the mind really know what the boundary should be? Doesn't the mind really know? Sure, there's right and wrong. Forget about what the Torah says. There's right and wrong. People know there are good things to do, bad things to do. Okay, sometimes it gets a little bit clouded, but, basic things they know. They can justify and say, no, it's not really stealing. The IRS takes too much money anyway. If it's a legal loophole, good. So no problem, it's legal. If it's not legal, so that's stealing. Right? We can justify things all the time, but deep down, everybody knows, even non-Jews, with the no-hide laws, knows the right and wrong. Right? God is not going to hammer them after they die. Why don't you keep my no-hide laws? Oh, I didn't know what they were. So, did you know you're not allowed to steal? No, Uncle Sam is different. What about, you're not allowed to kill, you're not allowed to murder. Nah, Grandpa, we pulled the plug, put them out of our own misery. It's a different issue. So they justify it, okay. But God's not going to slam someone with something they could have known. They could not have known. These are obvious things. Now, I would say there are a lot more than 7, right? Probably about 50 or 60, but I would say the many moral imperatives, they're going to get death penalty for it, may not even get punished for it, but they're not good to do. Speaking badly against others. Yeah, it's not a good thing to do, but doesn't apply, non-Jews, in general. Because there are things that don't make sense rationally according to the Torah. Right? Okay. But isn't it good not to speak badly against others? Nah, he deserved it. If he was in front of me, I'd say it to his face. Okay. Well, that means right. Totally doesn't mean it's right. Or should there be modesty, modest dress for women who are non-Jews? I would think so. Not obligated. Not obligated, but God should have mercy now. It's getting warmer the way people dress. Because it's not their fault, they were never educated. Okay. Yeah, I may agree. We're not living in Victorian England. Okay. But don't you think a person looks at a woman in a certain way, the way she's dressed? I mean, this is a guy talking here. Yeah. Aren't women objectified? You're right. It's terrible. It's awful. Okay. Not disagreeing, right? Not disagreeing. But don't you think if a woman dresses a provocative way, kind of her fault in a certain way? I mean, guys have to be in control. No question. And if they look and they have fantasies or whatever, it's their problem, 100%. Yeah, a non-Jewish woman dresses a certain way. Does she transgress the prohibition of lifting the apron, putting a stumbling block in front of someone? No, doesn't apply to a non-Jew. That doesn't apply to a non-Jew. For a Jew, it'd be a problem. Yeah, for a non-Jew, it's not a problem. Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah, I don't think it's a good thing. Most women say, I'll dress the way I want. People look at their own fault. Okay. But there's a reason they're objectified. I'm not saying it's right by any stretch. Yeah, but there's a reason. Yeah. Again, I think it's pretty simple. You can say it's sexist, but it's what sells, and it's the way they perceive themselves. It's the way that I'm not gonna say everybody because no one thinks about it. I don't think if I want to go out and I want to, and it's 95 degrees. It's 32 degrees Celsius. It's hot. Okay. So I'm gonna wear shorts, maybe really short shorts. It's too hot. I'm gonna wear a tank top. Okay. And if someone's well endowed, right? Well, again, we'll keep this clean. You don't think people are gonna look? They're gonna look. Even the best of people, the best of marriages, not gonna look. Probably. Right? Again, I'd say it's forbidden. For Jews. Non-Jews, I don't think it's a good thing. Right? But again, how does the person perceive themselves? They're going to say, it doesn't matter. I dress the way I want. You look and have fantasy. It's your problem. You're right. Not disagreeing. Right? That is true. A person dresses a certain way. They want to be perceived in a certain way. I think it's pretty simple. Maybe it's oversimplification. Right? But, people say that's crazy. People can dress the way they want. Again. Yeah. Why would a woman go out and wear something like very, very tight? They'll say, I like the style. Okay. Some of them, that'll be the case. Yeah, I'm not checking out stats. I didn't ask ChatGPT what he thinks, or she thinks, or it thinks, whatever, right? But you could ask the question. You could wear something. You could wear something else. It doesn't have to be so tight and this and that. So people want to be perceived, I would think, in a certain way, it causes other problems, right? Causes problems across the board. But again, obligation for a non-Jew? No. Not at all. So whatever. This is a much bigger topic. Definitely a much bigger topic. We've discussed it before. But, again, the point is, even for non-Jews, things that are what I would call a moral imperative, a non-Jew is not obligated. Right? They're not obligated. Certainly not going to get the death penalty for it, right? That's no question. They're not going to get the death penalty for it. It might not be forbidden at all. Question is, does it make them a better person? Isn't it better for non-Jews in general not to curse? Yes. Obligation? I wouldn't say it's an obligation. Yeah. But if you curse, okay. I'm not saying using God's name. It's a different issue. But, the way people talk. You would ask people, right? I didn't take a survey, but this is my guess. For what it's worth, you ask people, would you curse in front of your kids? Let's say you have, 5, 6-year-old at home, 7-year-old at home. Would you curse in front of them? Now, some people would say yes. Some people say absolutely doesn't matter. Other people will be a little bit hesitant. Say no. I try and be more careful around my kids. Now, what does that tell them? What does that tell us? A, they're a little more sensitive. And B, they understand cursing may not be such a good thing in this context. In other words, around your buddies, this and that, people curse all the time. Okay, so that's what we do. That's how we speak. I don't want my kid to do that. Don't you know he's going to grow up? He's probably going to be like that anyway. Okay. I don't want to do it in front of them. Some people. Again, I don't know what the stats are, but I would think they want to speak a little bit better, if their kids are younger. Again, if they're older, they can speak any way they want. But I would think even if they're older, but everybody curses. To me, it was a mind-boggling thing. Last time I was in the States, that you have older people, much older people, and say, curse this way, that way. I'm not saying all the time, but younger people, I can understand more. I definitely understand more. But you have older people, let's say, much older people, and think twice about it. And if you bring it up, they'll think you're nuts. They, try this at home. They'll think you're absolutely off your rocker. Not only that, they'll probably curse more, right? So even to give them a rebuke, may not help either. But you think about it, you tell someone, come on, not a good thing to curse, it's bad words. They're like, what are you like, where'd you grow up? England? Victorian England? Where do you live in the 1500s? This is the way people talk. This is the norm. It's a norm. Get this question all the time. People will say, in the workplace, they hear people curse this, that. Like, how do you get around it? I said, it's hard. It's kind of hard. Kind of hard to get around it, but that's part of the test. You have a what's it called? You have a you think about it more, right? It resonates more that it's not a good thing. It doesn't matter if you curse here and there, whatever, but you now have a higher awareness. That's the word I was thinking of. You now have a higher awareness. So what does a higher awareness do? It makes you more sensitive. Makes you realize, maybe it's not such a good thing. So again, according to the no-hide laws, is it forbidden? No. Is it a good thing? As we would say, a moral imperative? Yeah. It's not a good thing to curse, right? Certainly not good to speak badly against others. We'll justify it all the time. Certainly secular people say, come on, why? Person did this, did that. Don't they deserve? I should be able to say this and say that? Saying what they did is bad. What gives you the right, to badmouth it for no reason? Just for no reason, right? If it's permissible, good. If it's not permissible, then you shouldn't do it. But the Chofetz Chaim says even if it is permissible, who says you fulfilled all the conditions properly? And if you didn't, you transgressed more than 30 prohibitions in one shot. Right? It's kind of a scary proposition. So someone came to Chofetz Chaim after he wrote the book on the laws of Lashon Hara. He says, Rebbe, you told us we can't speak. We're not allowed to speak. Chofetz Chaim said, I didn't say that. I'm teaching you how to speak, how to properly speak, right? Right. One other thing, Rav Moshe Schneider, my Rebbe's Rebbe, of blessed memory, was a student of the Chofetz Chaim. So when this came out, he asked the Chofetz Chaim, doesn't it say, isn't it clear that a habitual speaker of Lashon Hara doesn't mean, you make mistakes here and there. You do it all the time. Person does it all the time. Yeah, doesn't it say, you don't get a portion of the world to come? Why didn't you write that in the book? So comes on the Chofetz Chaim, he says, you're right. But I said, if I would put it in the book, then people be miyayish. Miyayish means they're going to lose hope. They're going to say, well, everyone, basically speaks Lashon Hara. So then they'll say, well, we're going to lose our portion of the world to come anyway. We won't kill it. We won't keep any mitzvahs. No, they won't keep some or whatever. They won't keep anything. So therefore, I didn't put it in the book. Right? So again, does that apply to non-Jews? No, because a lot of the laws are not logical according to Torah. Right? So it wouldn't apply to a non-Jew. But isn't it a good thing not to speak badly against others and not have grudges and this and that? Sure. Right? Obligation? No. Why are the prophets using bad words? Who says they use a bad word? They give rebuke. You have to give rebuke. They had no obligation to give rebuke. They didn't curse people. And I'm talking about swear words. A curse is not a swear word by them. They're saying this curse should be upon them. Look at the tochacha, the rebuke that God gives the Jewish people at the end of the book of Leviticus and the end of the book of the Deuteronomy. All the curses, right? They weren't foul language curses. That's a different issue. These were curses that they were going to befall the Jewish people. Terrible things, terrible tragedies going to happen. right? But not curse using a full letter word, then, and speaking that language. I mean, if that would be the case, God would never come to them. Prophecy, right? He's never going to give over that type of prophecy, go curse people in that sense, right? Giving a curse in general is one thing. Cursing with foul language, totally different thing. It's called nivel peh, right? Nivel peh is forbidden. It is forbidden. Under all circumstances, forbidden. No matter what you go through, you don't have a right to curse, to swear. That's what it means to swear. But a curse over here doesn't mean to swear. Different thing. It's a different thing. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Sunday. Now back in the scheme of things here. I do this every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com. Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As. That's our fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman@gmail.com, which having a good beginning.